In 1946, anthropologist Lauren Isley published his idea of what might have happened in those lost eons of prehistory. Man was becoming something the world had never seen before, a dream animal, living at least partially in a secret universe of his own creation and sharing that secret universe in his head with other similar heads. Symbolic communication had begun. Man had escaped out of the eternal present of the animal world into a knowledge of past and future, the unseen gods, the powers behind the world of phenomenal appearance, began to stalk through his dreams. We don't think of speech as symbolic communication. We think of it as natural. But when you break down the steps those long ago dream animals had to go through in order to share their secret thoughts with each other, it turns out that words are highly motivated, cooperative, and, yes, symbolic. Once again, I searched Webster's dictionary and found word defined as an articulate sound or series of sounds which symbolizes and articulates an idea. In order to carry out what that definition suggests, we had to develop an idea, a concept, of each animal and action. Then we had to turn our old animal sounds, growling, barking, purring, into unique individual vocals that could stand for, symbolize that animal, bear, wolf, cat, or action, chase, fight, flee. In a rudimentary form, it was there in my garden when the jays let out their alert cry. In those lost eons of prehistory, we humans achieved a more complicated version of that cry, and it gave us a huge advantage over other animals. But it only worked if the group understood it both collectively and individually. Each human had to get the gist of it on his own. Speech was, and still is, a learned process. Most of us accomplish it without effort, but because of its symbolic nature, many with autism have trouble learning to speak. The prehistory of evolution into symbolic thinking happened something like this. Long ago, before previously thought, in some cases more than 40,000 years, we have sufficient evidence to the effect that Neanderthals possessed a symbolic culture. What was the nature of that culture? And how did evidence of it emerge? 30,000 years ago, men holding flaming torches crawled deep into the limestone gorge of the river Ardèche in southern France, and with charcoal from earlier fires, drew on its glittering stalactite walls their vision of animals: lions, horses, reindeer, rhino. Those who dreamed up that vision drew by the light of flaming torches, which must have made the animals, even as they drew them, appear to run wildly across the glittering stalactites. The vision held men in thrall for centuries. Southern France has other caverns with similar drawings, some dating 17,000 years later. Some are reachable only by mile-long crawls through limestone passages, long, hazardous journeys to what must have been sacred caverns of shaman magic. Was the magic to gain power over beasts too big and too threatening for a single man to kill? Or was it to woo a power greater and more terrifying than the animals, a power living in this uncanny kingdom, hidden from ordinary eyes. Ancient bone flutes have been found on these sites, flutes that today a man can blow a tune on. Did the flute imitate the cries of wounded animals, the yells of hunters, the grieving moans of mother animals whose young had been slaughtered? Or of crickets, bird calls, and the whine of cicadas? Was it to appease an awesome power, or to delight each other, or both? Were we, together with the animals, filled with wonder and fear, and a need to express it? The question reminds me of a particularly beautiful sunset on Martha's Vineyard. As we watch the sun drop into the vineyard sound, throwing its last magnificent glow over the water and the Menepsha beach grass, we realize two cottontail rabbits were also watching, sitting bolt upright on their hunkers, their paws held like begging dogs. If we'd made a move, they would have scampered, but for a moment they were transfixed, and so were we. When did we slip our animal leash and dream up the imitative magic that would transform us into worshipping humans? And who would rule the magic? Not impossible to imagine. Over and over, a man has recorded his handprint on the wall of the limestone cave in Ardèche, his hand with a crooked little finger. Are the drawings his, and has the tribe, or maybe the shamans, allowed him his handprint, maybe even celebrated it? Other handprints exist in other caves, some with a similar crooked finger, some without. The photo below is from a Spanish cave known as El Castillo. El Castillo predates the Ardèche cave by 10,000 years. It has no animal drawings, but it does have symbols. Dr. Jauke Zelao, prehistorian at the University of Barcelona, quote, determined that the red disk in the cave known as El Castillo was part of the earliest known wall decorations at a minimum of 40,000 years, and that Stone Age artists were painting red discs, handprints, club-like symbols, and geometric patterns on European cave walls long before previously thought. Handprints and symbols appear to predate animal drawings. The El Castillo handprints also suggest the celebration of tribal unity and teamwork. The men who recorded their hands must have crawled and slithered their way through blind passages, carrying some kind of torch. The feat had taken courage and dexterity, and more significant, hands with opposable thumbs. Stone Age men already had hands that could do what no monkey's paw could do. Closest to it is the octopus tentacle. Though a monkey has a hand like ours, its thumbs do not work in opposition to its fingers, and that limits its ability to hold and manipulate sizable objects. Only with an opposable thumb could a man hang onto a torch and manipulate it through cave passages. This unique gift gave Stone Age humans to pry into the physical world and manipulate it to their advantage. It also enabled them to draw. In Ardèche, men drew animals. As men saw how their torch beam flames lit up the drawings, making the animals appear to run as they drew them. They must also have seen how the torchlit stalactites bounced rainbow hues onto themselves, sparkling prisms of color that transformed them into glittering godlike creatures. Such a deeply self-conscious experience would change the most prosaic Neanderthal from an awestruck rabbit into a self-aware self in the company of other selves, their collective selves forming a unique group that could wield a greater power than any pride or pack, no matter how dangerous the animals might be. The Neanderthals had found the way to experience collectively how the idea of an action could change and better the reality in which they lived. Though this new way of thinking has no physical existence, the powerful notion of it could be preserved in the form of an icon. Then, somehow, in those lost eons, it got better than merely recorded in the form of a symbol. It got programmed into our human neurology. As far as we know, humans are the only animals that can think symbolically, with the exception of those with autism. Today, a doctor can check a child's ability to think symbolically by using the old game of make-believe. The doctor picks up a toy block, waves it through the air, and makes a humming sound. Mm, I'm a plane. The usual child is likely to respond picking up a toy block, pushing it around the floor and saying, Brum, I'm a truck. Each of them has turned their block into a symbol that stands for another object, and the sound they make stands for the sound of that object. Erik Erikson has noted that the way children play with toys indicates the way they will play with thoughts. Most children also draw symbolically. They draw a square, put a triangle on top of it, and say, "That's my house." They draw a stick figure with a circle for a head, put two little circles in the head for eyes, and say, "That's Daddy." Then they draw a littler stick figure with a littler head and say, "That's Mummy." Children accept each other's make-believe. Not so autism. Give an autistic child a bunch of toy blocks, and chances are he will line them up. The symbolic element of make-believe escapes him. When everyday life, with all its confusing detail, comes rushing at him, it's no wonder he lines up his toy blocks. He's trying to assemble a meaningful system with which to deal with life's chaos. Now think of a child like Arthur in Chapter 1, living in the era of El Castillo or Ardèche. The frightening impact of a powerful shaman leading an above-ground tribal ritual. It doesn't take much to imagine shamans with red ochre decorating their faces, the tribe dancing around them, chanting and drumming with animal bones on skins stretched over hollow tree stumps. The shamans holding aloft glittering stalactites they've hacked from the caves, waving them in the firelight, making them spatter rainbow magic on a frenzied crowd that is working itself up to an orgasmic ecstasy. What if Arthur, terrified by the din, the chaos, the painted shaman, his god face grinning at him in the twilight, had gone into shrieking hysterics, the first autistic meltdown? Would the tribe have accepted him? Or would they have abandoned him in the forest to be killed and devoured by a pack of wolves? When did intolerance enter our dreams? Or was it always there, a herd instinct we clung to as we spiraled upwards, dizzy with release from the old animal laws? After we dreamed up symbolic thinking and used it to empower us over other animals, we dreamed up how we thought the world ought to be, and the children who could not behave as we thought they should, we called changelings. In the latter years of recorded history, when witchcraft was alive and well, we said they were the bewitched offspring of Celtic nature spirits. Today, when you run across the instructions for ridding a town of changelings, you wonder how we could have thought up and carried out anything so cruel and so crazy. But we did. Consider the detail in this picture. It's taken from a 1565 painting by Pieter Bruegel the Elder, entitled Netherlanderish Proverbs. Art books, both book authorities tell us that each cluster of characters in this painting, crowded with people, illustrates a proverb. But they're at a loss to explain the proverbs illustrated in the lower left-hand corner, where a disturbing task is underway. A child is being tied up. He could be autistic, or he could have fetal alcohol syndrome. Either way, it's quite possible he's been pronounced a changeling as being prepared for a ritual burning. If so, the preparations don't seem to bother any of the surrounding characters, save for a nearby boy who clings to a log of wood. Art authorities tell us the boy is a symbol for hypocrisy, but it could also be the fears he is about to be the next. Here's the gist of folktale instructions. Before a mortal baby is christened, don't let him wear green ribbons, for the fairies will see the green and steal him away and put one of their own in its place. It will look like your child, but instead of speaking, it will croak and hum and take revenge on you with obscene tricks. A changeling child has no Christian soul. You must throw it on the fire. The flames will strip it of its enchanted shape, so it will have no choice but to fly back to its fairy home. These ancient instructions are so collectively damning that, as bioneurologist Eric Kandel suggests, tribal rejection could be in our neurology. Quote him, "Future research on the factors that enable members of a collective group to recognize one another may also teach us something about the factors that give rise to tribalism, which is so often associated with fear, hatred, and intolerance of outsiders." Dr. Kandel opened his 2007 lecture at the New York 92nd Street YMHA with a recollection of his painful childhood as a Viennese Jew suffering under the brutal tribalism of the Nazis. For Kandel to suggest that such behavior might be neurological is generous in the extreme. And from the look of early folklore, he could be right. Long before the Nazis, tribal intolerance had already lodged itself in our time-worn fairy tales in the shape of giants, ogres, elves, witches, trolls, physical grotesquerie that even today strike fear and hatred in our childish hearts. The ancient reaction may well have included fear of our children, who avoided human contact and wouldn't speak. Given their lack of social response, they could have been judged the eerie offspring of fairies, those pre-Christian nature spirits. According to Wikipedia, belief in changelings lasted in parts of Ireland until 1895, when Bridget Cleary was killed by her husband, who believed her to be a changeling. For some Irish, the belief is still alive. At a recent autism conference, a mother brought me a turn-of-the-century photograph of her grandfather, taken when he was a little boy with long curls. The curls, she said, were to fool the fairies into thinking he was a girl, because fairies prefer male children. Autism tends to be 4-to-1 male. The mother told me that when she was a baby and was slow learning to talk, her mother believed she was a changeling. I asked her if she was Irish. She said, "Of course." Another historic way of dealing with infants declared not human was to abandon them in lonely woods, live bait for wild animals. From this practice sprang tales to comfort grieving mothers, each mother praying that her baby would be found and suckled by a forgiving beast. The Roman statue of the mother wolf standing guard over the twins Romulus and Remus, her milk dripping into their open mouths, would be recreated in each era as the yearning for comfort stories increased with the practice of abandonment. Later literary versions would turn up stories like Kipling's 1893 tale of Mowgli, the boy raised by the wild animals of India, and Burroughs' 1912 novel, his novel of Tarzan, raised by the African apes. Both of these boys have an eerie strangeness to them, but the interpretation of their strangeness has shifted. Under the spell of 19th century romanticism, Mowgli and Tarzan are deemed pure, unencumbered with worldly knowledge, and incapable of lies. Eerie and pure are two sides of the same coin. By far, the most touching of these stories isn't literary at all. It's the 19th century account of Victor, the wild boy of Aveyron, recorded word for word in the notebook of a young French medical student, Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard. In 1969, Francois Truffaut, working from Itard's notebook and playing the part of Dr. Itard himself, produced a film about Victor called The Wild Child. But I doubt if Truffaut realized Victor was autistic. It would take another 20 years for Autism Authority Uta Frith, also working from Itard's notebook, to observe that all signs of Victor's behavior would be familiar to the parent of a child with typical autism today, despite the time difference of nearly 2 centuries. Today, Victor has made it into Wikipedia, where he's described as emerging around 1808 from the dense woods of South France. A 10-year-old boy, bushy-haired kid wearing nothing but a tattered shirt. According to Wikipedia, his food preferences and numerous scars on his body indicated he'd lived on the wild the majority of his life. Had he? If so, why was he wearing a tattered shirt? How come he knew how to dig potatoes and boil beans? Dr. Itard writes in his notebook of the thick scar on Victor's throat, a scar that appeared to be about 3 years old. But he doesn't speculate as to its cause. perhaps because it looked too much like the work of changeling believers. Had Victor's mother, knowing Victor could survive on his own in the wild, let her boy hide in the woods in order to keep him safe from changeling captors? I think of a 20th century father in Utah. He told me that his severely autistic son would be perfectly capable of surviving by himself in the wooded mountains of Utah, or was running away an old habit of Victor's. Autistic boys are known to be boulders, running away because they feel like it, because they've been asked to do something they don't want to do. And in Victor's case, running away to survive. Victor was mute. He had no way to tell his mother who was the man who tried to cut his throat. Was the man alone, or were others with him, all of them shrieking, "Devil's child!" when the boy, slimy with blood, slipped from their grasp and fled into the woods? A piece of the story is missing. Questions Itard in 1808 may have been afraid to ask, and Truffaut in 1969 didn't know to explore. In Truffaut's film, a pack of men with ratting terriers captures Victor. Itard writes in his notebook of a local abbot who was also a professor of biology. That being so, it's likely the abbot stopped the men from killing the boy. The abbot figured Victor to be about 10, and he too dated the knife scar as 3 years old. He wanted to learn how much cold Victor could withstand, so he took the boy out into the snowy woods and undressed him. Far from being cold, Victor began to frolic about in the nude. The abbot is noted to have concluded that the human reaction to temperature was due to conditioning and experience. Did that mean he thought Victor was not a changeling, but just an odd boy? Could he have written Philippe Pinel at the Paris Salpêtrière hospice, asking for a medical authority to rescue the boy, and Pinel sent his young medical student, Itard? There's a scene in Truffaut's film where Itard and Dr. Philippe Pinel consult over Victor. Pinel was famous, and still is, for his advanced and human treatment of the insane. Check the internet for his name, and up will come the famous painting of his releasing the insane from bondage. When Victor reached Paris and brought Victor Dr. Pinel, the two of them must have known they would have to deal with the political bed of hot coals going on between Enlightenment and the Church. In Paris, there were shouted arguments on every street corner, all quite different from Aveyron, where the abbot's word protected Victor. Also silence. In Aveyron, so hearsay has it, Victor was known to turn up at kitchen doors, ragged and hungry. Mothers fed him and never told. Silence was the only weapon against a powerful superstition that reigned through all of Europe. 20 years later, a teenager named Caspar Hauser would turn up on the streets of Nuremberg, Germany, claiming he'd been raised alone in a darkened cell. Today, Nuremberg honors him with a statue, but his history and his behavior suggest autism and tribal fear. 5 years after turning up, Caspar was stabbed to death. Tribal fear is still with us. Recently, I met a female millennial version of Victor. Now middle-aged, the woman told me how as a child her parents had declared her not human. and on a lonely road through an abandoned stretch of forest, they threw her out of the car to fend for herself. Still hardly grown, maybe as old as 12, she survived for 2 years, living off what she scavenged in the way of nuts and berries, and what she could kill. She had a shotgun she'd bought at a rifle store. In spite of being underage with no ID and an odd way of speaking, she'd saved a little money, and the store was happy to take it. She shot small woodland animals, rabbits and squirrels, and sometimes fawns. She knew how to make a fire by rubbing two sticks together. She could skin and cook the meat over the fire and eat it for days until it tasted funny. I don't know how she escaped food poisoning, but she did. It wasn't the meat that had upset her. It was the fawns she shot for their meat. As she saw the light dim in their almost human eyes and faced the physical fact that they were dying so that she could live, she accepted death in a way that Arthur in chapter 1 may never. As she told me her tale, I wondered if she understood that she herself would one day die. All I know is that after 2 years in the woods, she managed somehow to make her way to becoming a surprisingly successful jockey. I never used a whip, she said. The horse and I, we both wanted to win, so we just talked to each other. Today, her family wants her back. They've gotten wind of her jockey skill, and now they see her as a moneymaker. Because she's autistic, they know they can claim legal custody. So she lives in hiding, secretly protected by the two women who brought her to me. Unlike Victor's story, which he recorded in his notebook, this woman's tale lives only in hearsay. I promised the two who are protecting her that I wouldn't reveal her whereabouts. But her face lives with me always. Despite middle age, it's the face of a child.